I'm reminded of the quote that I often want to attribute to John Wesley, and I have to be reminded by folk that it was really Karl Barth who said that we're at our best when we have a Bible in one hand and a newspaper in the other, right? So what I'm about to say, some folk may think sounds contradictory to what I said earlier about stepping back and not feeling like we have to do everything. But I think this is causing us to reframe, reset. We shouldn't see what we're being called to do right now as new work or different work. It should have been a part of our work all along, right? When we have families who have been separated at our borders for a lot longer than this pandemic has been going on, when we have children who are yet right now living in what we call cages, right? When we have food deserts throughout of the world where people can't get their hands on good, nutritious food, those kinds of things, we ought to have always been talking about those things. When we have redlining going on, when we have gerrymandering going on as a part of our day-to-day life here in these United States of America, when we have a crisis of folk trying to flee war-torn areas and get to some safety in other parts of the world, this isn't new. And so this notion of engaging the world around us ought to be, just like I said, a part of who we are every single day. Lifting, as we're using the lectionary, finding ways to talk about what's happening in the world, bring that into our sermon and contextualize it for us so that we're not sort of living two lives. You know, we hear people talk about two Americas. Sometimes I think we lead two different lives. We have a spiritual life that is compartmentalized, and then we have sort of the rest of our lives. Well, when we were baptized, we said that our spiritual life is the whole of our life. So to be able to speak to what's happening now doesn't have to be additional work if we're already living out of what I believe is a Wesleyan context of the world is my parish. Scripture is given to us to help us live in this world as disciples, right? To be able to speak to it, respond to it, help dismantle those things that are sin, that are oppressive, that prevent people from being able to live, have life and have it to the full, right? So if we have not been doing that, this is our opportunity to do that more so. So as I said, it doesn't become more work. It is the ministry. It is the gospel. That's the good news.
Bishop, thank you for saying those words, especially the reminder about the Bible and the newspaper, because I think as a at least for myself, it can be easy to dive deep in Scripture and forget the context. So I exegete rather than exegete. So it's really helpful to hear that and to remember that. As a person of color, living in what is happening in this protest time of Black Lives Matter, it's so helpful to remember that though this affects all of us, this time in this season is about addressing systemic racism. Reverend Justin Coleman said once, if we were all asked if we're racist, we'd probably say no. Maybe the better question is, how does racism manifest itself around me? And where am I being called through my baptismal vows to engage in that? And so to answer your question, Shannon, I think that still plays. How am I being called to see sin being manifested around me? Because the truth is, what we've learned in these last few months since we've gone to strictly online in early March is if you're Facebook famous and you've got lots of friends, if you've got tons of Instagram followers, it doesn't mean that we're deeply rooted in the relationships we have where we're called to serve, where we're trusted to serve. So this period of time with this twin pandemic has uplifted and uprooted our relationships, whether or not we have a great relationship with city council, local firefighters, police officers nearby, local schools. And if not, yes, Bishop, I hear you and I agree. This is the time to engage with them, to work in partnership and in harmony with local nonprofits, because we can't do it all, but it doesn't mean we can't do something. The other thing I would say in this time that we've learned is the criticalness of providing Sabbath for our people and providing Sabbath for our staff and also providing Sabbath for my family. However we define any of those. And we know biblically that Sabbath is really about that, but in this time, it feels like anxiety is ratcheted up. Everything is more tense. So with the staff I get to serve, I'm begging them to take more time off than they're allowed to. and we'll figure out a way to deal with it financially. But because they're investing so much emotionally, we want to give them at least a mental break from what we're doing. And even with our church, we're trying to have less church activities and more community groups or the 18th century model class meetings of engagement. That way, we're not trying to get them to be a part of something, but to be engaged in relationships deeper. And something we've also learned in the last few months is a shift in language. At the very beginning of this time, we would say, if you're vulnerable, blah, 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 blah. Because I think we adapted that from our safe church policies, which is important. But what's different about this time is our calling as community and pastors, which is if one people in our community is at high risk, then we are all in high risk. And we should all practice as if. So when we have children in cages, we have systemic racism. If we have these things happening, it's not someone else's issue or my neighbor's, it's mine. And I need to own that for who I am. And so those are a few of the critical things I would say that we have learned so far. And the last thing I would name is we have enjoyed messing up greatly and trying things and failing and laughing at ourselves. And I've learned, at least through my local community, that they are insanely and unbelievably gracious as long as we can name our mistake, say what we learned, and move forward. And we can't communicate enough, so we try to engage in redundancy of communication. So over-communicating, we all know that, is critical in this time.